Hello and welcome to another episode of This F***ing Guy, the show that spotlights one f***ing guy who's making America worse and explains why they suck. This f***ing guy is brought to you by Simply Safe. There's no safe like Simply Safe. I'm Erin Ryan, host of Crooked Media's Hysteria podcast.
And I'm Alyssa Mastromonaco, the other host of Crooked Media's Hysteria podcast.
Here at This Fucking Guy, we like to give you a nice mix of information and haterade. And sometimes we highlight fucking guys who are well-known and already well-disliked. Other times, we bring you a rare B-side that is nonetheless an indispensable part of the fucking guy catalog.
That's why today we're talking about Leonard Leo. You might not know his name, but you're definitely familiar with his work. Leo is the dark money Svengali that spearheaded the transformation of the American judicial system into a right-wing policy machine. He's a major financial backer of Project 2025, the far right-wing blueprint that President Trump has followed to the letter since he was sworn in for a second time, despite the fact that during the campaign, Trump was all, I don't know about her.
The 6-3 conservative Supreme Court? Leonard Leo did that. All those local and state-level judge races that have gotten expensive and ugly, Leonard Leo did that. All those judicial appointments that Trump brags about, what, do you think Donald Trump was going to do all that work himself? Donald Trump's too lazy to walk while he's golfing. Leonard Leo did that. And Leonard Leo did this despite the fact that he's never actually practiced law. He's never argued a case. He's never been a judge. And now Leonard Leo has his sights set on everything you watch, read, and enjoy.
Leonard Leo was born on Long Island in 1965 into an Italian-American family. His grandfather had immigrated from Italy and had worked his way up from tailor to vice president in the clothing company Brooks Brothers. Leo has said he learned a lot from his grandfather. Unfortunately, what he learned wasn't immigrants are good and important.
After his pastry chef father passed away when Leonard was in preschool, his mother remarried and moved the family to New Jersey, which explains why he talks like that. Like many tedious male dorks and confident young lesbians, Leonard Leo was known to wear a suit and tie to high school. He was voted most likely to succeed in his graduating class alongside a girl named Sally Schroeder, who is not in fact a Peanuts character. She was the woman that Leonard Leo would eventually marry. Leonard followed a path trod by many other promising young assholes by attending Cornell University.
Leo studied under professors in the government department who were early adherents to a constitutional approach championed by Antonin Scalia and Robert Bork, two fucking guys who believed that the Constitution was not a living document. In fact, it should be interpreted forever in the way that its original writers intended, using common knowledge of the late 18th century.
So in practical terms, originalism is a bad faith fig leaf for a fear of social progress. Somehow it matters to originalists that abortion is not in the Constitution, but it does not matter to them that when the framers of the Constitution talked about the right to bear arms, they were definitely not talking about AR-15s, which had not been invented yet.
And like other Italian-American originalists, it doesn't seem to matter to Antonin Scalia or Samuel Alito that the founders of America weren't fond of Italians.
We might think of it more like cafeteria originalism. They only like the parts of the ideology that prop up their pre-established worldview.
But our little Italian-American ragazzo, Leonard, can't hear the cognitive dissonance over the sound of his own self-importance. And while at Cornell, he went from a pompous little boy to a pompous little man.
After graduation, he had a series of internships in D.C., most notably with Utah Senator Orrin Hatch. Hatch was a lipless Republican who once delivered a speech from the Senate floor defending a bank run by one of his friends that had laundered drug money and financed terrorism, written by the bank's lobbyists. But that's another fucking guy for another fucking time.
When Leonard returned to Cornell for the second time, this time for law school, he founded his school's chapter of the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society aimed to provide a counterbalance to what they perceived as a surplus of liberals and liberal thought in law schools and the legal profession by cultivating and promoting conservative law students, lawyers, and judges.
Let's talk a little bit about the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society is a club for originalists, and it sought to roll back laws promoting things like civil rights, environmental regulations, gun restrictions, and women's rights. These movements that produced these offending laws were, by the way, social responses to the cultural conservatives of the 1950s basically getting their way with no exceptions whatsoever.
Originalists are also fundamentally huge whiners. The Federalist Society was founded in the early 1980s. Leonard Leo was in law school in the late 1980s. At that point, Ronald Reagan had already served 2 terms as president, and the president at the time was George H.W. Bush, who had been Ronald Reagan's vice president. And even under those circumstances, with the executive branch firmly in the hands of conservatives, Leonard Leo was still being a whiny little bitch. After graduating from law school, Leonard Leo would never actually practice law. Instead, he would go on to be the first employee of the Federalist Society in D.C. But before he did that, he helped his good friend and the world's most well-known Long Dong Silver fan, Clarence Thomas, prepare for his Supreme Court confirmation hearings. For more on that fucking guy, you should check out our episode on him.
Much like how LeBron James started a transformation of the Cleveland Cavaliers when he joined the team as a rookie, Leonard Leo transformed the Federalist Society from a college club into a national dark money and influence clearinghouse. He helped start the lawyers' chapters across the country and helped build the organization into what it is today, a group that selects and grooms conservative law students and provides them with support and connections throughout their legal careers, so long as they take big conservative swings and demonstrate loyalty to the cause. By 2024, there were more than 90,000 members of the Federalist Society. Corporate donors included Google. And there's reporting that indicates the Koch brothers are also involved. This is sort of like if the Mickey Mouse Club founded a successful activism arm meant to build a federal judiciary that consisted entirely of Disney adults.
Hey, even without the power of the judiciary behind it, I wouldn't fuck with Mickey Mouse.
Me neither.
So thanks to Leonard's role at the Federalist Society, he's become a gatekeeper to judgeships and other legal appointments for conservatives. The further up Leonard Leo's ass you crawl, the better your career prospects.
In 2005, Leo helped launch the Judicial Confirmation Network, a tax-exempt nonprofit that aimed to help confirm George W. Bush's nominees to judgeships. Also involved in the founding of JCN was right-wing nutjob Ann Corkery, a prominent member of the fringe Catholic sect called Opus Dei, and Robin Arkley II, a Northern California megadonor who would go on to make bank during the foreclosure crisis. Remember both of those names, they'll be coming up later. The JCN first put its thumb on the scale of the Supreme Court nomination of John Roberts. President George W. Bush at the time had been mulling appointing his friend Harriet Miers to the High Court, but Harriet Miers wasn't a member of the Federalist Society, and John Roberts was. JCN turned the screws, and Roberts beat out Miers.
The JCN did the same thing with Samuel Alito's nomination in 2006. Alito, another Italian-American far-right anti-sex zealot, would go on to author the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade.
While Leo's eyes were always on the biggest prize, the Supreme Court of the United States, he also understood that the state courts needed to be meddled with, too. And sometimes Leo's influence isn't immediately evident. Let me take you back to my home state of Wisconsin in 2015. So the governor at the time was a soulless Federalist Society-endorsed toady by the name of Scott Walker. Walker, a Republican, was seen by many on the right as a possible future president. But there was one thing in the way. Prosecutors in the state were investigating Walker for violations of campaign finance law.
But before Walker could be charged, the state Supreme Court stopped the investigation and ordered the prosecutors to destroy the evidence they'd uncovered. The court reasoned that prosecutors had overreached. Walker never faced justice. Two of the members of the conservative majority in that ruling that got Scott Walker out of legal trouble? Leonard Leo judges. At the time of the 2015 case, not many people outside of moneyed Republican circles even knew who Leonard Leo was. But he was scheming and fundraising to fuck up the courts in a way that we are now finding very difficult to unfuck. What was happening in Wisconsin was going on across the country.
Here's the thing about the Judicial Confirmation Network. It is structured in such a way that it doesn't have to disclose its donors, which means that shadowy groups and well-moneyed lunatics can give virtually unlimited money to support the confirmation of judges the JCN supports, and go on to spend unlimited money trying to take down anybody that stands in its way. And in the years since the Supreme Court ruled on Citizens United that corporations are entitled to free speech and that spending money counts as speech, the JCN's expenditures have exploded.
The JCN ran ads attacking Alaskan politicians over their support for President Obama's nominees for the Supreme Court. They also have given money to an advocacy group called Nebraskans for the Death Penalty, a group whose purpose is pretty well explained in its name.
But merch from that group would be hipster gold. We can agree, right?
We could agree.
We could agree. After Federalist Society darling Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia dropped dead on a hunting trip in 2016, the JCN put a ton of money into the full court media press against President Obama's nomination for Supreme Court, Merrick Garland. One ad praised 10,000-year-old Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Chuck Grassley for refusing to consider Garland's nomination. The group spent $500,000 on ads sucking up to then-Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump, preemptively praising him for sticking to Federalist Society-approved candidates for Scalia's spot on the bench. Their push to hold the seat vacant until after the election was ultimately successful.
The JCN, which was now calling itself the Judicial Crisis Network, said it would spend $10 million to support the nomination of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. They spent $4.5 million advocating for Brett Kavanaugh's nomination and were accused of illegally mass texting Indiana voters urging their support.
The JCN spent $2.2 million on a campaign to support President Trump nominating Ruth Bader Ginsburg's replacement on the court, despite the fact that, like Scalia, Ginsburg had passed away during an election year. Of course, Republicans didn't care about their made-up no SCOTUS appointments before an election rule from 2016, and Trump, via Leonard Leo, selected Federalist Society-approved Amy Coney Barrett.
By 2022, the group had changed its name again, this time to the Concord Fund.
The other hub in Leo's funding network is called the 85 Fund, or Honest Elections Project. I can't even say that with a straight face. The group is also a nonprofit that, like Concord, can basically accept infinite money from anonymous sources and distribute it as it sees fit. The group was instrumental in legal challenges to the results of the 2020 election when Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump. It also runs ads against mail-in voting and champions the independent legislatures theory, a far-right fringe legal idea that asserts that state legislatures alone can determine election law. That theory was rejected in the 6-3 Supreme Court case Moore v. Harper. In that case, the three justices that dissented were Neil Gorsuch, Samuel Alito, and Clarence Thomas.
Let's talk more about Leonard's judges. Leonard positions himself so that powerful judges owe him a debt of gratitude for both their official positions and for unofficial perks that Leonard brokers for them, like, for example, arranging luxury vacations and private jet excursions and connecting high-level judges with politically self-interested billionaires. Think The White Lotus, except everyone in the cast is terrified of sex and looks bad in a bathing suit.
The billionaire matchmaker, if you will. In 2023, ProPublica revealed that in 2008, Leo had set up Justice Samuel Alito on a luxurious fishing trip with billionaire Paul Singer. He was flown there on a private airplane owned by another conservative megadonor, Robin Arkley.
Hey, it's our second Robin Arkley sighting.
And it won't be our last. So Salmon Alito goes on vacation with a couple of rich guys. No big deal, right? Except Paul Singer's firms were party to a case that was later heard by the Supreme Court, and Alito didn't recuse himself from that case.
Leonard Leo is also closely associated with billionaire Harlan Crow, who has financed lavish trips for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and his awful wife Ginny. Crow provided most of the financing for a group called Liberty Central, which Clarence Thomas's awful wife Ginny was paid a salary to run. Leonard Leo sat on the board. The organization was prohibited by law from engaging in political activity, but subsequent investigations showed that Liberty Central apparently violated the law by engaging primarily in political activity, including conducting its own polls. The Washington Post reported that in 2010, Leo arranged for Clarence Thomas's awful wife Ginny to be paid tens of thousands of dollars for consulting work, but specifically instructed that her name be left off records of those payments. In documents the Post reviewed, Leo said he wanted to give Ginny $25,000, but also that there should be, quote, no mention of Ginny, of course, associated with the transaction. Ginny was paid $80,000 overall. A subsequent New York Times investigation found that Leo had connected Supreme Court justices with at least 6 billionaire sugar daddies, or when we're talking about that much money, salmon daddies.
Now, if you're thinking, hey, wait a second, something about this doesn't feel right. There's no mention in the Constitution of an unofficial judicial pimp, and maybe we shouldn't have one. Well, you're not alone in thinking that. All Leonard Leo's back pageification of the judiciary is a means to an end. It allows Supreme Court justices to live the lifestyle of billionaires while earning the income of public servants, which keeps them from leaving for the private sector, which keeps Leonard Leo's power intact. You know, you can kind of tell what each Supreme Court justice's deepest desires are by what Leonard Leo has tried to arrange for them. Samuel Alito wants to be a rich big shot who still gets to whine. Clarence Thomas wants to live like a billionaire, but he also wants people to like him, and he also wants to whine about it. Amy Coney Barrett wants to be lavished with praise and attention by the male leaders of the conservative movement.
Obviously, this is deeply unethical and, depending on who you ask, possibly illegal. Chief Justice John Roberts has only offered tepid responses to public outcry over the megadonor Supreme Court justice fraternization going on behind the scenes. Since the ProPublica bombshells, the chief has begrudgingly championed a refreshed set of ethical standards for justices that many critics see as a toothless ethical window dressing.
But the Senate Judiciary Committee did try to subpoena Leonard Leo after the report went wide. In late 2023, on a party line vote, the committee authorized authorized the issuance of subpoenas to both Harlan Crow and Leonard Leo. Leo announced that he would not comply, blaming, quote, the left's dark money on the inquiry, but nothing ever came of that. And with Republicans now in the Senate majority, it's unlikely Leonard Leo will be dragged before a committee anytime soon.
An empty gesture from elected officials? Shocking.
When we talk about Leonard Leo and dark money, we're talking a metric fuck ton of dark money. According to records reviewed by ProPublica, between 2014 and 2020, groups associated with Leonard Leo raised more than $600 million for conservative causes from donors like the Koch brothers, Harlan Crow, and others who should be on a sort of Mount Rushmore of evil shitlords. And when Trump was elected, Leonard's beady little eyes turned into heart shapes, and he cozied up to the new president like a bikini-clad influencer working the yachts at the Cannes Film Festival.
Leo made no effort to hide that he'd spoon-fed Trump a list of Federalist Society-approved judges he hoped would be considered for the vacant Supreme Court seat. And Trump made no effort to pretend anybody on the list of judges handed to him was his idea. That's how we ended up with Supreme Court Justices Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. Leo is the one who ran the behind-the-scenes campaigns to win support for his hand-picked judges. He even prepped them for their hearings.
Does he cut up their food for them too? But it's not just the SCOTUS justices. During Trump's first term, Trump appointed 231 judges nationwide. 86% of them were current or former Federalist Society members. Here's a few of them from ProPublica.
Thomas Hardiman of the Third U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals has helped overturn the Obamacare birth control mandate and made gun laws even more loosey-goosey.
There's also anti-abortion nutjobs Kyle Duncan and Corey Wilson of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. You know we're in trouble when our judges are named Kyle and Corey. Do they wear wraparound shades in their official portraits?
And remember the Don't Say Gay law in Florida? Judge Wendy Berger upheld that one. Yep, she's one of Leonard's.
There's Justice Phil Berger Jr. of the North Carolina Supreme Court, who ordered the state's voter ID law reinstated, all of them hand-picked and endorsed by Leonard Leo. Chat, are we cooked?
As Leo's profile has risen, his tastes have gotten more expensive. His Trump bootlicking coincided with Leo suddenly coming into more funds. You see, before Trump, Leo was being paid a handsome sum by the Federalist Society, around $400,000 a year, according to the Washington Post. But $400,000 a year doesn't go that far when you've got 6 children in private school.
And not just a regular private school, an Opus Dei private school that costs $30,000 a year. We'll get more into Leonard Leo and Opus Dei alternately tucking $100 bills into each other's proverbial G-strings a bit later. This fucking guy is brought to you by Simply Safe. There's no safe like Simply Safe. I live in a pretty safe neighborhood, but I also have little kids and I have pets, and I also live in the territory of a gang of very rambunctious raccoons. And so if somebody's going to break into my house, I definitely want to stop that. But if raccoons are going to break into my house, I definitely want to be able to watch it on camera. With that in mind, I'm thrilled to be partnering with Simply Safe to give our audience the same peace of mind I have at a huge discount exclusive to our audience. Traditional alarm systems only trigger after somebody breaks in, giving intruders time to grab valuables. Don't take my piles and piles of fake food that my daughter uses in her kitchen and spreads around the house. With Simply Safe Active Guard, monitoring agents react in real time to prevent potential break-ins before they happen. Simply Safe agents can see and talk to potential intruders or raccoons in real time, activate spotlights, and even contact the police, all before they have a chance to get inside your home. The app allows you to arm and disarm your system, view camera feeds, and manage features from your phone, giving you full control of your security from anywhere, anytime. Simply Safe's AI tech allows cameras to identify familiar faces, so the system won't trigger false alarms for trusted visitors like family, neighbors, or your dog walker. Monitoring plans are affordable, starting at around $1 a day. Best of all, there are no long-term contracts or cancellation fees, and you can try it out with their 60-day satisfaction guarantee or your money back. I like Simply Safe because personally, I kind of hate technology. I don't want to interact with it. Simply Safe is really easy to just set it up, and there it is. I don't have to read instruction manuals again. I don't have to tinker with it. I don't want to tinker. I just want it to be set up and I want it to work. Save 50% off your Simply Safe security system when you sign up for a professional monitoring plan and get your first month free. Visit simplysafe.com/guy to customize yours. That's simplysafe.com/guy. There's no safe like Simply Safe.
Up until 2016, Leo lived in a modest house in suburban Virginia, but since then, he's spent money like a lottery winner who doesn't believe in curses. He's gone on a car and real estate buying binge and even hired a wine buyer and a locker at Morton's Steakhouse.
As 2016 closed, Leo gave $1 million to Donald Trump's inaugural committee and pledged to donate $1 million to the Catholic Church. Then, in 2018, Leo and his wife paid off their $710,000 mortgage on their house in suburban Virginia and bought a $3.3 million mansion in Mount Desert Island, Maine, which the Leos completely paid off a year later, according to legal documents.
Leonard Leo's Mount Desert Island neighbors' disdain for him spiked after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022. Since then, his home has been the site of regular protests. Leonard has been a huge bitch about this.
Yes, he has completely Karened out on his displeased neighbors, calling the police on them and characterizing people who are protesting him personally as anti-Catholic. He said during a recent speech, quote, "Catholicism faces vile and immoral current-day barbarians, secularists, and bigots." He also referred to the protesters as the progressive Ku Klux Klan and continued, "If you happen to be a particularly prominent Christian, they intimidate and harass you outside your home and in restaurants and stores for the express purpose of driving you into social and political exile."
Sorry, Leo, but I don't think they're protesting you because you're Christian. They're protesting you because you're an asshole.
And those barbarians at the gates. According to news reports, the people outside Leonard Leo's home were mostly older women, many of them over 75.
Leonard Leo didn't make any friends when he bought an actual church, St. Ignatius of Loyola Catholic Church in Northeast Harbor, Maine. He bought it through, what else? A charitable nonprofit called Chelsea Holdings LLC. He goes regularly with his family and his bodyguard. The church costs $2.7 million.
Jesus, famously loving money in churches. That was one of his main things. In 2020, Leo took over a firm called CRC Advisors, and the money tree that Leonard Leo had been shaking so hard started raining its fruit down on the old organization. Crew analyzed tax documents and discovered that the combined income of the organization in the 2010s was $46.6 million. Once Leo took over, he doubled that, and then some.
In 2021 and 2022, Leo transferred at least $43 million from some of his nonprofits into CRC Advisors. Leo hasn't detailed exactly what service CRC Advisors provides, given the gobs of dark money that is being shoveled into its maw and in turn into Leonard Leo's hands. The way Leo was wrangling so much dark money rang some alarm bells with the Attorney General for the District of Columbia, Brian Schwab. In 2023, Schwab tried to investigate Leo's network of nonprofits for possible tax evasion. Of course, Leo has stonewalled the investigation and ran crying to his allies in Congress. Schwab found himself being investigated, tarred, and threatened by Leo's allies.
What a pussy. You know, he's like the kind of wimpy, like, regent sitting in his throne going, "Seize him! Seize him!" In the early 2020s, Leonard landed a whale. The New York Times reported that over the course of 2 years, Leo had been the recipient of a series of gifts from a shady Chicago businessman named Barry Side, who gave our boy control of $1.6 billion. That donation went to the Marble Freedom Trust, another one of Leo's organizations, and was structured in a way to avoid about $400 million in taxes.
Leo was asked about the donation during an interview with Barry Weiss.
What was your relationship like with the person that gave you that money, and how are you spending it? Because it's a lot of money to spend.
First of all, it's not a gift.
What is it?
It's a cross.
$1.6 billion is a cross?
Yeah, because my job is to be a good steward of everything that Barry Side ever made in his life. And that's hard.
I think he almost broke Barry Weiss's brain.
Spare me. It is wild that he thinks
$1.6 billion cross.
So hand it to someone else, dude, and quit fucking complaining. So Leo has always been quite Catholic. His grandparents were daily mass attendees. Mine were too. I'm a retired Catholic. Hello, other retired Catholics, rise up. However, Leonard Leo is what I'd call a cafeteria Catholic. He loves to dish up on the succulent chicken tendies of being anti-sex, anti-abortion, and anti-birth control. But he always skips over the yucky vegetables of other Catholic teachings like being anti-unjust war, pro-migrant, pro-worker, pro-turn the other cheek, pro-helping the poor, and recently, as per the guidance of the late Pope Francis, pro-human beings have a moral responsibility to be stewards of the climate. I'd like to defer to a nun by the name of Sister Joan Chittiser here, who, speaking on the general character of the pro-life movement, says it better than I possibly could.
But I do not believe that just because you're opposed to abortion that makes you pro-life. In fact, I think in many cases your morality is deeply lacking. If all you want is a child born, but not a child fed, not a child educated, not a child housed, and why would I think that you don't? Because you don't want any tax money to go there. That's not pro-life, that's pro-birth. We need a much broader conversation on what the morality of pro-life is.
Preach, Sister Joan.
I'm not religious, but take
Right.
it from this nun who is.
Take it from Sister Joan. So Leonard Leo has done that thing an awful lot of people do, which is try to retrofit the teachings of Jesus, who would probably laugh at the idea of $1 billion being compared to the cross that we used to torture him to death, into a cruel and selfish worldview.
But Leonard Leo has always been a bit of a dick about his faith. In the early 2000s, Leo was tapped by President George W. Bush to represent the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, which was supposed to advocate for freedom for all religions around the world. Leo used the appointment like he was a Catholic missionary, pursuing primarily religious persecution against people who shared his beliefs. He ended up getting fired after a former colleague accused him of firing her because she was Muslim. A bunch of his staff also resigned over the incident.
Another way Leo has tried to leverage the Catholic faith to maximize his own power is by cozying up to members of the moneyed and creepy sect within the church, Opus Dei. We mentioned Anne Corkery earlier. She's a longtime member of the sect, a hyper-conservative, secretive, and most importantly, weird sect of Catholicism that has found herself in hot holy water over its authoritarian regime apologia, child abuse scandals, and general okayness with the worst of America's fringe conservative movement.
Like we mentioned earlier, Leo sent all of his living children to expensive Opus Dei schools in the D.C. area. He's also a major donor to that school. He and his wife were also among the top donors to the Catholic Information Center, a recently opened Opus Dei-run facility that houses a library and hosts daily mass in D.C.
Now, notice Erin said living children. Leonard and his wife Sally had 7 children, but one of them, Margaret Mary Leo, his oldest daughter, was born with spina bifida, a debilitating birth defect that is often unsurvivable. Margaret reportedly had a fascination with Catholicism and priests. When she was almost 15 years old, she died suddenly.
So when Opus Dei opened its new Catholic Information Center, whose portrait was front and center in the foyer? It was not the founder of Opus Dei. It was Margaret Mary Leo's, with Jesus blessing her and golden light surrounding her head like a halo. Prayer cards featuring her image were handed out at the reception desk with the words, "Margaret Leo of McLean, pray for us." Now, let me just say, as a retired Catholic, this is a story that made me gasp. This is the sort of card that's handed out with pictures of saints on them for use by Catholics who want to pray for the saints' intercession. So it's pretty clear that Leonard Leo is trying to make his oldest daughter into a literal fucking Catholic saint.
How do you campaign for sainthood? How do you become a saint?
A documented miracle is a prerequisite for sainthood for people who are not martyrs. So no miracle, no halo. And for years, the Leo family has been circulating this story that after Margaret's tragic and very sad death, that little Sacred Heart medals like the one she used to wear would appear in unexpected places. Like the family says, one appeared in a candy bowl in a hotel that the Leos stayed in on their way to visit conservative megadonor Robin Arkley. I'm sorry, like...
We're not laughing at Margaret.
We're laughing at, like, the candy bowl and megadonor Robin Arkley, who profited immensely from, like, the financial ruin of people in Northern California. The Lord works in mysterious billionaires.
Leo, a real Wendigo when it comes to his insatiable lust for money and power, is not satisfied with ruining the judicial branch or making normal Catholics look bad. He's focusing his next phase on taking over culture and entertainment.
In 2021, he became chair of the Teneo Network, which describes itself as a talent pipeline for conservatives in places like Hollywood and Silicon Valley. Members of the organization, according to Monitoring Influence, include Missouri Senator and famous January 6th runner Josh Hawley, Vice President J.D. Vance, right-wing media twerps Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro, and Leo's right-hand man Jonathan Bunch.
So if it seems like you're getting a lot of tradwife content and manosphere sewage spewed into your feed, if it feels like there's an awful lot of new anti-feminist and anti-gay media being made in the next few years, well, you might just have Leonard Leo to thank.
Alyssa, call me an optimist. I think there's a pretty steep learning curve between what Leo wants Teneo to do and what it's capable of doing. And that means that people who stand in opposition to the network's goals have some time to get their ducks in a row. And here's why I think that. Leonard Leo does have experience fueling the Washington hype machine in ways that we're now seeing across the entertainment industry. Like, we've seen underhanded PR campaigns artificially inflate buzz around everything from the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial to the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League to the Justin Baldoni Blake Lively mess. And Leonard Leo has tried kind of primitive versions of this, like back in 2016 as the 25th anniversary of Justice Clarence Thomas's confirmation to the Supreme Court hit. Leo-affiliated groups rose to the occasion.
According to the Washington Post, groups associated with Leo spent at least $1.8 million on a fawning campaign meant to make it seem like Clarence Thomas has fans. The money helped boost positive results when you looked up his name on a search engine and pushed negative results down. There were websites honoring Clarence Thomas as well. The Judicial Crisis Network even started several Twitter accounts honoring Clarence Thomas, 3 of which it continued to maintain into the 2020s. The JCN also runs the Clarence Thomas fan accounts on Instagram and Facebook.
Imagine if you were Clarence Thomas and you found out in the Washington Post or in the news media that all of your fans were Leonard Leo-fueled sock puppet accounts. It'd be like if you were in middle school and you found out that your dad paid everybody in your class $100 if they'd come to your birthday party. So Leo has some meager, and I'm going to just say a little bit pathetic experience trying to build hype in the culture beyond his inner circles of sanctimonious freaks and jowly capitalists with personality disorders. But when it comes to taking on Hollywood, Leo has a short but rocky track record. You see, back in 2020, organizations associated with him spent about $1.5 million promoting a film about the life of Clarence Thomas called Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in his own words. The only people interviewed in the film are Justice Thomas and his awful wife, Ginny. The film aired on PBS and was released in theaters in early February 2020. It grossed $282,149 globally, which is about enough to purchase a pre-construction one-bedroom condo in a small city in the less expensive of the Dakotas. So Leonard Leo can't always buy his way to power either, even within government. In 2020, a right-leaning Wisconsin Supreme Court justice named Dan Kelly lost his bid for re-election, despite the fact that Leonard Leo-affiliated groups dumped $1 million into that race in the last week before voters headed to the polls.
And in 2023, when another Wisconsin Supreme Court seat was up for grabs, Leo-endorsed Judge Kelly ran again, this time against a liberal judge named Janet Protasewicz.
But by now, progressives had caught on to Leo's attempts to drown the state Supreme Courts in the same kind of money and influence peddling he used to install the Supreme Court's 6-3 conservative supermajority. Under the hot spotlight of national attention, Leo isn't such a magician anymore. Leonard Leo turned on the money faucet, so did progressives. After the most expensive state Supreme Court race in history, the liberal judge won by double digits, handing Dan Kelly his second L, and flipping the Wisconsin State Supreme Court to a 4-3 liberal majority for the first time in over a decade.
That record for most expensive state Supreme Court race ever would be broken 2 years later in the same state, this time with Elon Musk burying the electoral process in dark money. The 2025 Wisconsin State Supreme Court race would also end with an 11-point liberal victory.
But let's not rest on our meager laurels here. The devil works hard, but Leonard Leo works harder. And until progressives have their own counterweight infrastructure in place, every little judicial race is going to be a knockdown, drag-out contest in a whirling toilet bowl of dark money. So, to summarize, almost everybody in the world has dealt with private tragedy. Even the most fortunate among us don't escape it. And even given his personal tragedies, Leonard Leo is among the most fortunate among us. Long marriage, a large family, an Ivy League education, a gift of $1 billion that he didn't earn, a mansion in Maine, his own church, and yet he can't stop fucking whining. His entire personality is built around the idea that he is somehow oppressed, that other people's personal choices are happening to him because of a religious faith that so conveniently props up his own sense of aggrieved entitlement that it almost reads as delusion. He's a hypocrite and an asshole, and nobody has done more to move our nation in a more cruel direction than Leonard Leo, a man who truly embodies the maxim that there's no hate quite like Christian love. We realized the other day that we are so deep into Five Weasels territory with most of our fucking guys that we're going to have to add a little bit of depth of flavor to our rating system by placing on a this fucking guy matrix. Okay, Alyssa?
Ready.
Okay. So this time we're going to rate them in terms of like what quadrant they belong in. So imagine an x-axis and a y-axis. The y-axis ranges from reckless dumbass to scheming sociopath. The x-axis runs from opportunist to true believing zealot. Alyssa, any final thoughts on Leonard Leo, and how do you rate him?
So let's see. Leonard Leo, 100% scheming sociopath.
Okay.
Right? Everything he's doing is largely motivated by what he wants for himself.
He is a scheme-based person.
He's a scheme-based person. And then I'm going to put him somewhere between opportunistic and true believing zealot. Because is he really a true believing zealot? What does he believe in? It's not really God. It's like just being rich.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, he's opportunistic. So I'm going to say scheming sociopath halfway to true believing zealot.
Okay, interesting. All right, I'm going to say I think Leonard Leo is made of schemes. He's a scheme-based life form. But I also think he's a true believing zealot. I think he really, I mean, he's a great fundraiser, right? That's like his main thing is he like gets people to give him money. Fundraising is basically sales, right?
Yep.
In order to be a really good salesperson, you have to really believe what you're selling. And I really think he believes what he's selling, even if it's him twisting it into justification for him having more money than it would allow a rich man to get into heaven. He's shoehorning something into a belief system. He just wants to justify whatever he's doing and whatever gives him the most power. We would have broken the weasels, the weasel system.
We would have needed more weasels.
We would have just like blown out the weasel speakers. He's done more to hurt this country than most people.
And that's all the time we have for this edition of This Fucking Guy. If you like what you've seen, please like and subscribe.
And if you have a suggestion for another fucking guy we should cover, please leave your suggestions in the comments.
One more thing before we go, we have to give a shout out to the incredible coverage of Leonard Leo from ProPublica. Please read their coverage, and if you need more Leonard in your life, check out their podcast, We Don't Talk About Leonard. All of our sources in addition to ProPublica, as always, can be found in the video notes.
Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.